everybody, how you doing? Today we're going to talk about Enneagram Threes, but I want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer, I guess. I think of all the 9 types, there's always going to be at least one that for another type, for another number, they're going to look at it and be like, what? That's so weird. Why would anybody do that? And for me, that number is a 3. 8's a little bit too, but we'll talk about them next week. 3s for me, I just have a really hard time understanding the motivation. And I assume that's true for like every number. Like if you're not a perfectionist, if you're totally chill with the world, then a 1 probably sounds kind of crazy to you. So I understand that everything is like that. And next time when we do 4s, then that's going to come up again. But there's something about 3s I have a hard time with. So going into this, my disclaimer is I've read about 3s. I get a basic sense of what they are, but I'm really hoping I'm doing them justice and treating them fairly. And in case I'm not, I want to make sure that that's clear, that at least I'm aware of it. And so I'm trying. So that being said, let's see what we can do. 3s. 3s are driven people. They are goal-oriented. They are success-focused people. They want to achieve things. They want to be known as achievers. And that's where things get kind of interesting for 3s. For a 3, their value is derived from knowing that other people see them as successful. So if they are in fact successful, that they've done a lot of stuff, they have awards to show for it, or their life is the way they want it to be, that's a really big deal for 3s. They're very happy with that, and they want to make sure that other people know that as well. The downside of that is if they're not all that successful, then it's just tragic. Like they're going to try as best they can to at least come off as successful. So if you have a 3 who wants to be great, but something went wrong somewhere along the way, they will probably always try to reframe it or do it in some other kind of special way so that they still come across as successful. So here's where I disconnect. I'll get into this part quickly and then I'll zip back to the other stuff. I disconnect because when I first read about this, I thought that sounded really shallow. And for me, that was a really big problem. I was like, ugh, that just seems icky. Like, ooh, I have to be seen as a success, otherwise people won't like me. And that maybe just flies in the face of so much of the other things that I hold as valuable. But that, for a 3, that's what it is. And so I really do struggle with that. And the idea, like, if you're not seen as a success, then you have to, like, present an image of yourself as if you've got it all together. And it's a hard one for me. I value vulnerability. I value authenticity. Those are the things that I care about. And for 3s, those are like, why would you want to be vulnerable? That's crazy. And authentic, they would never want to seem as inauthentic. So it's not like they're like, authenticity, forget it, it's stupid. But they're not always fully authentic. Because here's what 3s do. Back into the actual discussion part. 3s can walk into a room. They can look around a room, figure out who the key players are, figure out the whole like feel and vibe of the room, and then they can go into chameleon mode. And they say, well, they'll change themselves up, and they can walk into a room and be exactly who they need to be seen as successful. Okay, now the hard part then is for other people that 3s can come across as being two-faced. They can come across as being inauthentic, like I said earlier, because if they're in one room that demands that they be super cheery and laughy or whatever, they'll do that. I grew up in a religious environment, so a 3 would be someone who in one group of people might be, I'm not going to say a terrible person, but they will do what fits for a social friend group. But then if they have to go to church, they're going to be right there, like sucking up to the pastors, like, I'm here and I studied my Bible. And they'll do these kinds of things because that helps them seem valuable and seem successful. So, like I said, it's the good thing and bad thing. Like, the thing about you is your best and your worst trait. So for 3s, the good thing is they are going to work hard. They are people who, because success is the goal, they're not just going to like stop short on something. They're going to see something through to completion, and then they are going to be ready and willing to kind of show off their work, to be like, look what I did. And because they want to be seen as successful, they're going to do pretty darn good work. Downside is that is so important to them that sometimes they can be a little tricky, a little conniving, maybe even a little dishonest, and in trying to get people to make sure that they think they're successful, even if they're not. So for threes, a big thing for them is to kind of get to this point of realizing you're not the things you do. But that seems to be the message they grow up with, is you are the things you do, and you're only as great as your last success, and those kind of ideas float around. I also imagine, though I haven't read this anywhere, I imagine a 3 is also the person who did like one really, really cool thing when they were really young, and they keep bringing up that one story. So here's a reference. This is specifically for my wife. In I Heart Huckabees, which is a movie that she would recommend. I don't know if I can just outright recommend it, but Jude Law plays a character in I Heart Huckabees who is the ultimate 3. He can move from room to room, become who he needs to become, and he uses that. He's very manipulative and weird, and but he has to be seen as successful always. So sometimes he's a little dishonest over here, a little trickster over here, but he tells the same stories over and over again too, because they are the stories that make people laugh. They are the stories that make people think that he's really smart, that he outsmarted somebody else who makes him seem like the big man. Tells the same story over and over and over again, and I would imagine that would be a 3 trait. That they had a success, that's what they hang on to because that's what they think other people want to see. Here's where it gets really crazy for 3s. If you live in the United States, you live in a whole country that basically says 3s have the right mentality. That's what you're supposed to do. You are supposed to be a success always. It's a 3 country. When I moved to Southern California, I thought I'd move to 3 country USA, and I think there's a lot of it here. I think there's pockets of it all over the country, but living in Southern California, this is 3 country. The amount spent on landscaping, are you seeing all that behind me? Like some of that's just stuff growing over a wall, but Southern California, 3s dominate, because no matter what the drought conditions are, nobody has a dead lawn. All of these wealthy, affluent neighborhoods keep their grass perfectly green, perfectly trimmed, hired out help to make sure they trim everything up. We got palm trees and vines and all sorts of tropical plants, and it's all a status symbol. And that's what 3s care about. So it's a really weird place to be. Like if your lawn dies, people are like, oh, what happened over there, Jimmy? Lose your lawn due to the drought? And they're over there like, screw the drought, I need to look like I'm a success. Keep that grass, I was gonna say clean. Clean your grass. Well, whatever. You know what I mean. That's a status symbol. That's what 3s care about. And this whole area is like that, but really the whole country is like that. We love success stories. Those are the most valuable stories that we have in our culture. You could take into like massive blockbuster films and you have these kinds of things. Like, I don't know that Tony Stark is a 3. I think you could make a case that he's something else also. But what we love about Tony Stark, or any superhero really, is no matter what, they come out on top. They are a success. That's why we love underdog stories. Underdog stories we love them because it is achievement. It is success. And so that kind of love, that kind of like craving for that kind of a life, that's what 3s are about. So like I said, they're really hard workers, and that's awesome. The downside is if they don't have that, they can be manipulative and trickster. I said trickstery before, I need to find new words. But they can basically be deceiving to come off as something they're not, if they think that's going to give them better standing with their group. So I want to end on this note. Something that's really interesting about the Enneagram in general. I can look at a 3 and say like, oh, that is so silly and so shallow and so obnoxious. And they're going to look at me and say the same thing about my type, probably. But here's what I have to understand, and this is what the Enneagram has kind of helped me figure out as I go along. The Enneagram helps me understand that most people, they're just doing what's wired in their brains. People are not conniving. They are not trying to deceive you. They're not trying to work some grand scheme or a long con to like just get what they want. Like there are some individuals, I think that's certainly what they do. But as a whole, people don't do this. It's just something in their brain. In Cron and Stabile's book, they mention the Apostle Paul, who says, you know, this is all the things I want to do and I don't do them. There's all the things I don't want to do, but I do those. What the heck? It's from the Kale Contemporary version, if you want to look that up. And there's something about human beings that when you're not aware of who you are and you're not aware of how you act or work, you will surprise yourself like that a lot. And you'll surprise other people and you'll frustrate other people just as you frustrate yourself. And so the Enneagram is an important reminder for me as I'm talking about threes or any other number. Like what I see as shallow for them, it is the thing that drives them. It is the thing that they hold dear because of the environment they grew up in, the things that they were expected to do. And who am I to look at them and be like, wow, that's a really stupid motivation. Hey, change your entire brain. Like, what a ludicrous thing for me to think and to say. And so that's kind of where I want to end today. As we continue working through the Enneagram, we've got 6 more to go. But I'll be back on Monday with Enneagram 4s. But this is kind of the value of it. Like, you can treat it as like this really goofy parlor trick. Like, oh, you do that? I guess you're a 7. But instead, to take it and look at it and be like, this is what you're doing. Here's what I see. That might frustrate me, but I need to understand that you're not doing it to be mean. You're doing it because it's just the way you're wired. You do things you don't want to do, and you don't do things you would like to do. And so that moment of growth, that moment of like loving yourself, like I said yesterday, becomes so important, because without being able to love yourself and value yourself and acknowledge that I am who I am, and I can be gracious with myself and accept myself for who I am, if you don't have those things, you don't grow. You stay in this kind of drudgery of not knowing why you're doing what you're doing. And that's something the Enneagram helps me understand. That I can look at something and be like, why are they doing that? Why am I doing that? And for me, just having an answer to those questions sometimes helps me feel a little bit of peace. So thanks for watching. Over the weekend, I won't be doing these, but on Monday, I'll be back with Enneagram 4s. So if you want to subscribe, I'm going to put it right here. Put it right there. Subscribe. I should drive more safely. Otherwise, videos, I'll have some of those up there. They're around. You know where to, just clicky, whatever. Anyway, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next time. And, yeah.